me a little bit too.
Well, I know next to nothing because I'm having trouble.
Yeah.
So how's it going?
Good. I'm ready to see what I got in this exam number 3.
Yeah, I gotta get to correcting. Hopefully tomorrow.
You know what sucks? I'm going to be honest. That's probably going to be my weaker of the 2 other tests because for some reason, man, I spent a lot of time on the responses. I tried to. And then all of a sudden, I look at the time, it's 25 minutes. I'm like, I haven't started multiple choice yet. I got to get going.
Well, there were some people that didn't finish, so I moved the essays to the front.
Yeah.
So then, but then that slows, you can use up all your time doing that, and then you have to, rush through the multiple choice questions.
Yeah, that's what happened my second time. I did all the multiple choice, and I looked at the end. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got
it. Yeah. Well, there's, wherever I put them, there's a disadvantage.
Yeah. No, they were good questions, though. They were definitely good questions.
All right. Well, we'll see. I'll try and start looking at them tonight and hopefully finish them tomorrow. Okay. But then there's some people that didn't take it yet, so we'll see how that goes.
Oh, yeah.
So I've got a couple people that for whatever reason missed it. So, that's how things go.
Yep.
So, okay, well, we got to wait. We can't really start because it's not, I don't know, what time do I have here? Yeah, it's not 1 o'clock yet, so we got to stall. So,
sounds good.
I don't know. Okay.
So, what's the final exam going to be like? Is it going to be like, obviously, every unit combined?
Yeah, probably like 3 to 4 questions from each chapter.
Okay.
Most of the questions you will have seen before.
Okay.
But by that time, you've seen like 500, so it'd be hard to remember them all. There'll be a couple essays. They'll probably be from the last section.
Okay. So it's not going to be like a 100-question test or nothing, is it?
No, about the same.
Oh, maybe, okay, that's nice.
Maybe a little bit longer. I think it's worth an extra 50 points, so probably another 20 questions. So
like an hour and a half to take it, maybe then.
Yeah. I don't want to double the length because then that it's not a majors course. And if I double the length, that's an ordeal. And so just make it a little bit longer. We'll have a bit from everywhere, but it's not going to be that long. It'll be, did you get the main points?
Gotcha.
So and I think I'm trying, hopefully you should see okay, that was a main point. That was a main point. That was a main point. I really wanted you to know about, heart disease, really wanted you to know something about skin cancer. And so hopefully it's, I'm not, those things shouldn't be sneaking up on you. They should be like, okay, yeah, I kind of thought he might ask about that. So, okay. So I got almost 1 o'clock. So let's look at the schedule and then we'll start going over stuff for this week. So I think that's the schedule there. So do you see the biology 145 scheduled topics?
Yep.
Okay, so we're through. This is week 9. We're through with the, this is week 10. We're through with exam 3. Now we're on to a little section on reproduction and DNA, really. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the reproductive system, how that works. Then chapter 20 is going to be genetics, inheritance, genes and inheritance, and a little bit about DNA, and then DNA technology. So this is kind of getting away from how the body works after this week, and then talking about how things are passed on and what can we do with DNA. So it's a different section. And then the last section of the course, which we're not that far away from, is more kind of ecology and human impact type stuff. So a different kind of section. So we're headed into something a little bit different. We talk a little bit more about negative feedback. After this week, that's about it for that. And then that will be about it for organ systems, how the body works. We're kind of getting away from that. So, okay. All right, let's go to another share, and we'll look at the reproductive system a little bit. So, this was wait, no, that didn't work. Hold on. Let's start that again. Why didn't this work? Okay, share. Did I stop the other share? Is that still there? Do you see the reproduction? Oh,
Yeah, it's on the PowerPoint now.
Oh, this is the wrong one. Hold on. Okay, I got to stop this. Okay, let me monkey around here. How am I gonna do this? If I don't get this set up, I'm kind of lost. So I want to open something. I'm going to browse. Now, do you see the reproductive system thing? No? No? Okay, hold on. So then let's go here. Screen share. Now, do you see reproductive system? Yes? Okay, I can't make that bigger. Why can't I make that bigger? Hold on here. What's going on with this? Okay, so I'm gonna skip around here. So do you see the control slide with the wrestlers? Okay, so in the reproductive system, this really involves kind of some complex interactions between different systems. So the brain is really in charge of reproduction, and part of the brain called the hypothalamus controls our reproductive hormones. And it does this by stimulating the pituitary gland to release hormones that influence the testes in men or the ovaries in women. And so there's this complex kind of system where the reproductive system is controlled by the endocrine system, which is controlled by the brain. And so this is a kind of a complex communication between these three structures. Do you see the pituitary gland with a bunch of red arrows and green arrows? Okay, so this is supposedly the brain up here, and the brain can release some hormones. And really, these are chemicals released into the blood that act on a little gland that hangs just below the brain, which is the pituitary gland. And then when the pituitary gland gets a signal from the brain, it releases hormones that cause the testes or the ovary to produce very unusual cells, sperm or egg, and then the sex hormones, testosterone in the man, estrogen, and progesterone in the female. Okay, everything else about the reproductive system is kind of just plumbing. You know, the males have these ducts, they have the penis, and that just carries the sex cells to the female. And so you have this complex series of interactions in both men and women that's based on these hormones that both men and women have, gonadotropin releasing hormone, and then luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. The big differences in the female have to do with where the cells are released, and then the female serves as the host for the developing fetus. Okay, and so this is a a lateral view of the female's reproductive tract. You see that? Yes? Okay. So the ovary releases the ovum or ova into this uterine tubule, and that's where fertilization occurs, because sperm is deposited in the vagina and travels up through the uterus into this uterine tube or oviduct. Okay. And so it takes these hormones in both men and women to do this. Women have the additional issue of having to support the developing fetus. And so to do that, their hormones have to prepare the uterine lining to thicken. And so this is a really complex slide that's kind of goofy. But here it shows the developing ova, which takes a while to go through specialized cell division meiosis. It's ovulated, and after it's ovulated, it can be fertilized. And for pregnancy to occur, the fertilized egg must land on the uterus, and the uterus has to be thickened and have certain glands present, and that requires, each month, it requires both estrogen and progesterone to build up that lining. Okay, and so that lining is thickened, and if an egg or a fertilized egg becomes established on the lining, it can release its own hormones that cause the lining to be maintained. If not, the lining is lost, and a woman gets her period, and the whole cycle starts again. And so both men and women have gonadotropin-releasing hormone, follicle-stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone. And in both cases, it produces causes cell division in the ovary and the testes that produces a cell that has half the number of chromosomes. And so that's the specialized cell division. And then that's where the difference occurs. Men release sperm, and that sperm go into the female's reproductive tract. The female's reproductive tract has to be prepared to receive that fertilized egg. Okay, and if it does that, and it does so in the proper amount of time, that gives the egg enough time to secrete hormones that maintain the uterus. Does that make sense? Yes? No? Maybe? No question, Ethan.
I said the concept is easy, but everything you just said gets a little bit confusing.
Yeah, it does. With these, both men and women, you have the same set of hormones initially, and then the men, it's the testes, and the testes produce testosterone. And in women, it's the ovary, and the ovary produces estrogen and progesterone. And so you have the same or a similar organ. The reproductive organ in men is the testes. The reproductive organ in women is the ovary. It's not the penis or the vagina or the uterus. It's the testes and the ovary. And that's the main organ, because that's where the sex cells are produced. And that's where the hormones are produced that make us a man or a woman. And so that's where everything that's important happens. And so, you have these secondary sex characteristics. In men, we have hair growth on our faces. We have lots of hair growth. We tend to put fat in our abdominal region, but not on our arms or our legs. We tend to be taller and heavier than women because testosterone has a stronger effect on growth. Women are better at controlling their temperature. These men are more aggressive, more willing to take risks. These are all secondary sex characteristics. For women, the obvious one is breast, but there are others as well. Women have a very even distribution of fat. And so even really buff women look smoother than men, because they have a little fat on their arms and a little fat on their legs that kind of smooths them out. And because they have this fat, they're better at controlling their body temperature. And so the characteristics we associated with male and females are secondary to the production of the sperm and the egg. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So then let's end that share. And so that talked a lot about that in the little program. But there was something I didn't really talk about too much, and that was there are pretty long sections in your book on birth control and sexually transmitted infections. And so let me go to that and see if I can find something on that. Okay, do you see the birth control slide there? Okay, so there's that picture there. That's a joke from my wife. So she says the most perfect birth control for men is living in their parents' basement, playing computer games, wearing white socks, and probably smoking. She said that works because no woman will ever have sex with him. But obviously we want other types of birth control because some people do have sex. And so there's an important objective to birth control, and that is that for both women and for children, it's better if the first child, if a woman has matured to a certain point, usually in her 20s, that's better for her health, her long-term health, if she has her first child later. And then it's better for the baby's health as well, because the baby's able to get more from the mother. And then spacing children apart, usually more than 2 years, 2 to 3 years at a minimum. Okay, and that gives the child more time to bond with the mother, more time for the mother to breastfeed. The mother's less stressed if you space the kids apart. And so, and just for example, there when I was growing up, my parents were World War II era adults. They came of age in that era. And there were a couple things that happened about that time that kind of worked against the timing and spacing of births. One was it was really easy to find a pretty good job. Okay, if you graduated from high school, you could go work in a factory and you could make a pretty good living. And so young people had access to money. The other thing that was really bad, or kind of bad for families, was that you had companies pushing infant formula. That they were saying infant formula is better for babies than breast milk. That was never true, but they would say, science says this. And so the companies were good at promoting formula. And so like my parents and my aunt, they got married young. And when my mom had babies, instead of breastfeeding, she gave them formula because it was fairly inexpensive, and the company said it was better. Well, what that meant is my mom, because she wasn't breastfeeding, she was fertile again immediately. And so my mom had 6 kids in 10 years. My aunt had 11 kids in 16 years. Okay, that's tough, from the fact that, like my aunt in some 4-year period, she had four kids. So each kid gets less time with the parent alone. The mothers are stressed from having so many children. Their bodies are still recovering from prior births, and they wind up being pregnant again.
Do you think that those companies knew that was going to happen? Do you think that was their plan all along, or?
No, I don't think they knew that. I think they just wanted to sell formula. Yeah. And what happened was, for my mom's generation, her siblings were spaced out because you had to breastfeed. And since you had to breastfeed, the kids were all 2 and 3 years apart at a minimum, often longer. Because when a woman is lactating, that inhibits ovulation. And so that pregnancies used to be spaced out just because of that. So anyway, so this makes birth control something that can help people and be improve their health, and not only improve the health of the women, but the health of the children as well. So there's lots of different methods of birth control. There are behavioral methods like abstinence, which means just avoiding sex forever. There's the withdrawal method where the male withdraws the penis before he ejaculates. That has some disadvantages in that it requires lots of trust, and there's no going back. And then there's the rhythm method, or sometimes called the lactation method, is that in the rhythm method, couples avoid intercourse during fertile periods of the woman's cycle. So close to the period of ovulation, they would avoid intercourse. Okay, or if they've got a child, the woman breastfeeds and ovulation is inhibited. Okay, used correctly, that can be fairly effective. There are also barrier methods that prevent sperm and egg from reaching. Male condoms, cervical caps and sponges, the diaphragm, those all are barrier methods. They have the benefit of sometimes blocking fluid from the partners, so some of them can actually reduce the chances of sexually transmitted infections. There are hormonal methods. These work to inhibit ovulation. And so by taking a synthetic progesterone, they inhibit ovulation. And so these are, the oldest of these are oral contraceptives, the pill, but there's patches or implants or rings that will do the same thing. And RU486, the morning after pill, also works like this. A large part of its effect is inhibiting ovulation. And then there are surgical methods that are more or less permanent, like vasectomy and tubal ligation, and then the removal of a pregnancy through abortion. Okay. So instead of kind of discussing too much about them, your book has something about them. I just like to say that these have different rates of success. That in perfect use, some of them can work very well, but in typical use, they may not. We know that women who are have a partner where they have intercourse with no method of birth control, about 80% of them will be pregnant in the first year. And so these methods are yearly pregnancy rates using these methods of birth control. And so most of them are pretty effective. And they have the advantage then of allowing women's bodies to recover and to allow women to space out births. And we don't talk about it much in this chapter, but breastfeeding should always be encouraged. It's only rarely that you should consider not breastfeeding. But that's a big way to help people, or help women and couples space out births, is by breastfeeding. Okay, so, and then kind of an additional thing that is discussed in the book that I want to say a little bit about are sexually transmitted infections. Okay, and these are infections that are transmitted during intercourse, when the mucous membranes or body fluids of one partner come in contact with the mucous membranes of another. Okay, by and large, the only form of birth control that's going to prevent these are barrier forms of birth control. And by far the best of these is the condom, to entirely cover the male penis and then maintain so that there's no transmission of male fluids to the female reproductive tract. Okay, sexually transmitted infections are really, really important because some of them are very common and they have important effects. Some of them are fatal or have consequences that are long-term. They are probably the major cause of infertility. Most bacterial infections can be cured with antibiotics. So things like gonorrhea, syphilis, and chlamydia can be cured, and you can actually get rid of the infection. The bad news is something like chlamydia has such mild symptoms in many people that they don't realize that they have a serious infection. And so lots of sexually active adults have chlamydia, and it only produces symptoms initially, but over the long term, it can produce infertility. On the other hand, the other big group of viral or of sexually transmitted infections are viral infections. These are like human immunodeficiency virus, herpes virus, hepatitis B virus. What are some other ones? There's, human papilloma virus. These infections, once you have them, are very, very difficult to treat, sometimes impossible, and they are impossible to cure. You have them. You may be able to control them, but you have those infections. Now, even if it's an infection can't be cured, it can still be controlled. But control winds up meaning partners have to talk to other partners. They have to say, I may have this infection, and if we're going to have sex, we have to use a barrier contraceptive. This week's forum is about human papillomavirus, which is something we should all be familiar with, both men and women. Human papillomavirus is the only known cause of cervical cancer. Cervical cancer is a cancer that affects the lower portion of the uterus. Papillomaviruses can cause genital warts, cervical dysplasias, which are abnormal growths of the cervix. That's why women need pap smears. Cervical cancer is a difficult cancer to diagnose early from symptoms. Often, by the time it's diagnosed from symptoms, women are pretty far advanced in that cancer. This is why it's important for women to have regular exams and regular pap smears so that cervical cancer can be caught early, because it's potentially fatal. And the bad news about it is it affects young women. It's not most cancers affect older people who've already been through their childbearing years and that they've had a chance to live a full life. But often cervical cancers hit during the early part of women's childbearing years in their 20s and 30s, and so kill relatively young women. Okay, and so we can prevent that with a vaccine, but that vaccine has to be given before women or boys are sexually active. Okay.
Do they still use that vaccine? I got that a long time ago. Like, do they still push that?
I think there've been a couple versions. There's the Gardasil version, and then there's another version. But you should get that when you're a young teen or before that. Okay, and both boys and girls should get it. Human papillomaviruses are much more likely to cause cervical cancer, but they can cause other cancers, of course, and they are infecting the male's reproductive tract, and the male is going to pass it to females. So it's important that we immunize both boys and girls to prevent that. So
the reason why some people still get it is what, they're just not vaccinating or something, or?
Yeah, there's some. It's not a required vaccine yet. Hopefully, at some point it will be. There's some pushback by social conservative groups about vaccinating against sexually transmitted infections. There's the fear that will cause people to become more promiscuous. There's no evidence for that being true, but that's their logical, they go through a series of logical things, and that causes them to be against it. I would say, and they take it as a moral stance that we should not vaccinate against sexually transmitted infections because that might increase promiscuity, because it reduces the risk associated with having premarital sex or extramarital sex. But there's no evidence to support that, and I think from a moral standpoint, that's kind of backwards.
Yeah, that's not right.
As a parent, and I'm a parent of both daughters and sons, I recognize that I cannot control my child's behavior. They are their own person. My daughters are in their 20s. My son is just preteen. And I don't know what's going to happen to them, and I don't know who they're going to be around. but my obligation as a parent is to make sure that to give them the best chance to be successful. I don't want them to be punished for having sex with the wrong person.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to do everything possible to make sure, particularly my daughters, don't get cervical cancer, so that I had them vaccinated. And I don't even know if they knew what they were getting vaccinated for. It's just another shot. And for my son, I don't want his future wife to get cervical cancer. And so I want to make sure that he's vaccinated so that she wouldn't get it from him. And hopefully her parents are doing the same thing, that they're vaccinating her. And so I think, if you think about the moral obligation, I think the moral obligation as a parent, I have to make decisions for my son and daughters that will affect them long into an adulthood. And I want to protect them, even if they may, and who knows, one of the hard things about sexually transmitted infections is you have to rely on your partner to say, I think something happened down there, and I think you should go checked out. It's a very hard thing to say. And it's, if you ask your partner, hey, have you had sex with anyone else? it's a hard thing to ask your partner.
Yeah.
And it's a hard thing to necessarily get a straight answer. And so, people have a hard time admitting to mistakes, and sometimes something that you think is forever is in 3 weeks a mistake. And so, let's not make it a cervical cancer mistake where it ruins someone's life and cuts it short.
That's a really good way to look at it. I agree with everything you just said.
So not everybody does. And so that's important to note. But we had similar discussions about smallpox vaccines, because sometimes people said, well, disease was a punishment from God. But that in that case, it was just for breathing. And so we eventually worked our way through that. We worked our way through that. And the same with influenza, we worked our way through that. We vaccinate everybody for influenza that we can. It's important to protect people. Okay. All right. So that's, I think that's pretty much all I had to say. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, you got my email? Okay, good. All right. Okay, I'm going to stop there. That's about 30 minutes anyway. I will see you next week. We're going to talk about genetics. So kind of getting off in a different area. We'll do our best. Okay.
Have a good weekend.
Have a good week.